Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today our topic is contract of goods and sales. Now I am going to tell you about the contract of sale of goods. Sale of Goods Act. The law relating to sale of goods is contained in the Sale of Goods Act 1930. The Act came into force on 1st July 1930. The Act contains 66 sections and extends to the whole of Pakistan. Contract of sale of goods definition: those type of contract in which the ownership of movable goods is transferred from seller to buyer. Or we could say that a contract of sale of goods relates to movable goods. All essential of a valid contract must be present in a contract of sale of goods, like capacity of parties, pre-constant, and it may be verbal or in writing. It may be expressed or implied. We already explained these all of things, that what is expressed and what is implied, in the previous lecture. Now I am going to tell you about the essential, that what is the essential of a valid contract. Keep in mind that that is the essential of those type of contract which is valid. The first thing is contract. A contract a contract of sale of goods relates to movable goods. Here we take the example of Ali promises to sell his radio to B, or to Ehsan. It is a contract of sales if the parties of competing to contract consent is free, and all of essential of contract are fulfilled. So that's we call it a valid contract. The second one is seller and buyer. There must be a seller and is a will. There must be seller and as well as buyer. Seller means a person who agrees to sell goods, and buyer means a person who agrees to buy the goods from your shop and from you. So that is buyer. Or we could say that a contract of sale must have a seller and a buyer. A buyer means a person who buys or agrees to buy goods from you, and a seller means a person who sells or agrees to sell goods. When there are joint owners of a particular good, the owner of one part can sell his shares to the owner of the another part. Here we take the example of seller and buyer. Ali sells his computer to Ahmad for 40,000 rupees. Ali is the seller and the Ahmad is the buyer. The third one is transfer of property. We could say that the transfer of property is an essential of the contract of sale. When you sell the goods, so on the time you must be transfer the ownership of these goods to the buyer. Or we could also say that the transfer of property is an essential of the contract of goods of sold of goods of sale of goods. Here property means the ownership of goods, and a transfer of possession. Here we take the example of transfer of property. Ahmad sale has cars to Ali for 4 lakhs rupees. The ownership of the car transferred from Ahmad to Ali. So that we call transfer of property. The fourth one is goods. That's mean physical goods which is can movable from one place to another. Every movable property we call it the goods such as straw, gas, fruit, etc. And we could also say that it is necessary that the movable sorry we could also say that it is necessary that the movable goods must be the subject matter of the contract of the sale of goods. Here we take the example of goods. In sales has cars to Marina for 3 lakhs. It is a contract of sale of good. It is a contract of sale because subject matter of the contract. For example, car is a movable good. The fifth one is price. Those type of a contract of sale which is must be a specific price. When you sell the goods and with against of those goods you receive the money. We can we call them a contract of sale. And we could also say that the consideration in a contract of sale must be the price. When goods are sold or exchanged for other goods, the transaction is barter and not a contract of sale of goods. If the goods are sold partly for goods and partly for price, it is a contract of sale. Here we take the example. Ahmad sells his chair to Barina for 2000 rupees. It is a contract of sale. The sixth one is sale and agreement to sell. We could say that a term of sale include both sale and agreement to sell because when the ownership of a goods transfers to the buyer and and with against of goods you receive the money from the buyer at a time we call it contract of sale and sale of agreement when I give you the mobile to a buyer and said to him then check these mobiles within 2 days if you face any problems so that is a sale of contract and I could not sell the mobile on him properly because here we also take the example of land and we could say that the term contract of sale includes both sale and an agreement to sell when ownership in the goods is transferred from a seller to buyer at the time of a formation of contract the contract is called a sale and now we define the agreement to sell. When the transfer of ownership in the goods will take place at some future date, the contract is called an agreement to sell. Here we take the example of sale and agreement to sell. Barina buys a box from Karina and pays the whole price on a counter. It is sale. An example of agreement to sell, Arena agrees to buy Barina's cars from for 8 lakh per 8 lakh rupees. If his mechanic approves, it is an agreement to sell. Now, difference between sales and agreement to sell. The first one is transfer of property. The ownership is goods transferred to the buyer at the time of contract, while agreement to sell means the ownership is goods is to be transferred to the buyer at some future date. The second one is types of goods. Ali sales tax place the goods are in existence, or we could say that existence means existence of goods. Existence of goods means it includes those type of goods which we can be touched and which is specific in existence. An agreement to sales means it is includes the uh, contingent goods. And we can also say that it includes those product which is not available at a time, those goods which is unspecified and unexistent. The third one is recovery of goods. If the seller if the seller refuses to deliver the goods, the buyer may be sued for recovery of goods. Well, in or we could also say that if the seller refuses for the goods, so then can be request to them that recovery those goods which is hold. Well, in sale of agreement, if the seller refuses to deliver the goods, then buyer cannot request to them for the recovery. The fourth one is risk of loss. When the ownership of goods were transferred to the buyer, and at the time and at the night their goods were destroyed, then the buyer can be suffer and all of the loss. Well in the sale of agreement, if the seller were signed to someone that when the mangoes comes, I will provide you a lot. So throughout the heavy rain, the mangoes were destroyed. So the buyer cannot suffer at the loss. The next one is consequences of breach. Here we could say that if the buyer failed to pay the price of the goods, then the seller will be request to him that give my money. Well, in sale of agreement, we could also say that if the buyer failed to pay the price of a goods, so seller don't care about him, and he can't request to him about the price of goods. The next one is right of resale. Right or resale. We could say that when the ownership and goods will transfer to the buyer and with against of goods you receive the money, so then you can't resell those goods. Well, in a sale of agreement, here we could say that if the seller was said to the buyer that when my goods were comes from then I will sell you. So after some days, when they receive the goods, so he is not bound with them. Now the seller can sell the goods from per everyone, per to everyone. He can also sell those goods with the high price. Insolvency of buyer. Here we could say that if the buyer insolvent, then his legal representative were paid to price to the seller. Insolvency means when the buyer died, when the buyer died, then their legal representative were paid the price to the seller when in sale of agreement. Here, if the buyer insolvent, so the seller don't care because when his legal representative paid to him, then he delivered the goods. And the next one is insolvency of seller. We could say that if the seller is insolvent, then the buyer can recover um, from the officer from the officer receiver because the ownership of the goods in with the buyer. And we could also uh, and well in sale of agreement, if the buyer paid to the and the seller become insolvent, then the buyer cannot get goods from them because the ownership of the goods is with the buyer. Nature of contract. When the contract is executed to be done well in sale of agreement, when the contract don't complete, or we can say that it is a executory contract. Types of goods. The first one is existing goods. Those goods which is you have owned and or which are in your stock ready for the sale. We call it existing goods. The next one is specific goods. Those goods which are identified. We call it specific goods. A certain goods. The goods which are identified after the formation of the contract of sale are called a certain goods. The next one is uncertain goods. The goods which are not identified and agreed upon at the time of the contract of sale are called uncertain goods. The next one is future goods. The goods which are manufactured, produced, or acquired by the seller after making the contract of sale are called future goods. These goods do not exist at the time of contract of sale. Here we take the example of mangoes and chair. The next one is contingent goods. Those goods that are not existent at the time of contract of sale, we call it contingent goods. Here we take the examples that A agrees to sell a rare painting, but if he can be able to buy from Ahmed. So it's enough for today. Thank you so much. If you have any question, so you can ask easily in the comment box. Thank you.